Hi, I'm Ann V. Brady, and I will be discussing adoption and adoptee searching from a new book, A New Beginning, the story of my adoption, life, and service. What I will be discussing is the fact that in my book, I talk about when I was 36 in 1990 that I decided to finally search for my birth mother. I didn't really know who she was, what her name was, and I called my mom up first and to tell her what I was going to do, and that I was searching for my birth mother, and I wanted to know if she knew what my birth mother's name was, or what my name was before I was adopted. And she told me that she thought my name was Veronica McDonald, but she could be wrong because she was more interested in adopting me and didn't pay attention. So she didn't know if McDonald was my last name, or the name of a social worker that she dealt with. Well, I went with that and I looked up the address for the town hall for Tewksbury, Massachusetts, which is where I was born. So what I did was I wrote a letter to them and mailed it off to the town hall in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. And I never received a message, a letter, or anything back from them. So again, now this is the time of when we didn't have internet. We had Fidonet and bulletin boards. Well, I decided that this was a dead end. So I went on one of my BBS chat groups and asked, do you know of any BBS adoptee searching chat groups out there? Because I need some information. And somebody gave me the name of an adoptee searching BBS board. And so I signed up on it and asked the question, explained what I had done for my search so far. And they wrote back and said, you need to write to the Department of Social Services in Massachusetts. So I went online and looked up Department of Social Services, Massachusetts, and they had a form online that you could print out. And so I printed it out, and it told you it cost like $35 to send it in to Department of Social Services for them to look up your file. And so that's what I did. And so one morning, as I'm heading to work at Department of Clinical Investigations in Aurora, Colorado, I got a phone call. My husband Ed picked it up and wasn't going to hand it over to me because he knew I was going to work and I had to drop the boys off at daycare. And but anyway, he handed me the phone, and this woman who worked for the Department of Social Services, in fact, she was the head of the department, called me and told me that she had my file, and she said that the name you gave as your birth name is wrong. You were born Veronica Celia Pierce. And so I was surprised because when I filled out the form, I had put my adoptive parents' names, what name I thought I was, and my name and so forth, when I was born and where. And so she's looking at it and she says, did you know you have a brother? Well, she said, do you know you have a brother, Bob? And I said, no. I'm thinking she's confused because I have a brother, Bob, or Robert, in my adoptive family. And then she sort of hemmed and hawed and said, "Wait a minute." And she checked in and said, "No, no, no, you do have a brother Robert. Uh, they're born in different years. Uh, so my brother Robert in my adoptive family is 8 years older than me, and my brother Robert, who is my birth brother, was born in 1950. So I was completely taken aback, and she said that I can send you your file, but it'll be a non-identifying file. Names will be redacted and so forth. And so I eventually got that, but she also gave me this information. She said, if you want your original birth certificate, you can get it, but you have to write a letter to a probate judge to approve getting, now this is in 1980, to approve getting your original birth certificate. And she said, I have the name of a judge who is sympathetic to adoptees. And she gave me the name of the judge. And so I looked up the judge, and she was a probate judge for Middlesex County. So I wrote a letter to her, and I got my original birth certificate. And on it, it had my birth mother's name, which was Helen Frances Pierce, and my birth name, Veronica Cecilia Pierce. But it didn't have a name for the father. So I had no idea who the father was, who my birth father was. When I got my file, it was hard reading at first because I had two parts to the file. One was a synopsis of a short file for my brother Robert, and there were redactions in there, of course, but it talked about him living with his family and then being dumped off at living with a foster family for years, and then being dropped off at the orphanage, and that he was very confused. Uh, and I'll talk more about that later. But what I found interesting was certain areas, when they whited out or redacted, they weren't redacted in the same place. I'll give you an example. My birth mother's name is Helen F. P, and then that's redacted out. In another area, it says it's redacted out again, but then it says known as birth mother Helen F. P, and then underneath it says or also known as Helen Pierce. And it's like, okay. But she described to the social worker my birth father. She said he was about 28, curly red hair, John H. was his name. He drove a bakery delivery truck, that he was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and that he lived with his widowed mother. And so I spent years looking for a John Houlihan, because for some reason I just assumed that I was able to verify from some person in the DSS saying that, yeah, his name was John Houlihan. But she said, don't let anybody know that I told you that. But anyway, so I spent years looking for John Houlihan. But in my file, it was weird because when it talked about me, it said that I was born with what do you call it? Well, anyway, I had problems with surviving. And so they kept me in the hospital. Well, not in the hospital, but yeah, I lived in the hospital for a year. In, uh, Struggling to survive is basically what they said. It's called something else. I can't remember it now. But they basically, I lived in the hospital for a year because they decided that because I was didn't have the capacity to, I was struggling to survive or thrive. They decided that they didn't want to put me in an orphanage. They wanted to put me in a foster home, and I guess it took them longer than a year to put me in a foster home. I do know I was in at least two foster homes before I went to Nazareth Home. And the first home, from what I understand, it was they took all of us out of there because they were upset that it was a young couple taking care of us that really didn't keep an eye on us, didn't treat us. They said I was running out in the rain and I was sickly, and so the second one, they took us out of the home because the mother had gotten pregnant, and foster mother had gotten pregnant, and she then lost the baby. She miscarried, and so removed us, and then I was put into the Nazareth home, which, from what I understand, was run by nuns. But I did discover that I was adopted by my birth family, my adoptive family, the Newmans, and after I found out all this about my birth mother and I read up on her, uh, I was mad at her considering she's weak and everything. But when I talked to my mom, she said actually she was quite strong. She did what she had to do. Now, one thing I do know about my birth mother was that she took care of her mother as she was dying from cancer. She was 19 at the time. My grandmother died in 1938. My birth mother was 19 when she died. And she just said she was going back to school, finish high school. And after she did that, she decided to become a nurse. She became a licensed practical nurse. And she, her father had divorced her mother and moved to Florida with another woman. Uh, so it was just her and her brother and her mother until she died. After her mother died, her Aunt Agnes Cooper showed up, and my mother didn't like her because she felt that where was she when her mother was dying and she could have used the help. Why did she wait until her mother died and then all pop up and say, "Oh, I'll take care of you," you know? But anyway, I decided that I would go ahead and search my birth brother. When I talked to my mom, like I said, she explained to me that, when I told her what I said, what I've learned about my birth mother, and she gave me some perspective, and, which I appreciate because I know at first I was angry and, you know, but anyway, I couldn't search them for my brother because I was received orders to go to school in San Antonio. So fast forward, after a year of school in San Antonio, we went to Fort Rucker. It's now Fort Novosel in Ozark, Alabama, or Daleville, Alabama. Well, anyway, once I was stationed at Fort Rucker and we lived in Ozark, I started searching for my birth brother. Well, someone had given me a name, Robert Pierce, and I was searching online for him only in New York, well, not New York, only in Massachusetts, but that was because Robert Pierce is such a common name, and I was going on the assumption he still lived there. Well, anyway, when I finally somebody sent me an email saying, here's a Robert Pierce, and it says he was born in 1950. So I called up, and lo and behold, it wasn't my birth brother, it was my cousin. And he put my uncle on the phone, and found out that my uncle and my birth mother were estranged. He did not know that she had died. And in the between time, I had gotten a hold of my mother's birth and death certificate, along with my original birth certificate. So I sent copies of that to him. I kept the originals. And he sent me pictures, and he had me on different occasions. We talked. He was into geology like I was. And we would talk, and occasionally he would have me talk to different of his children and stuff, and so that we would get to know each other. But Robert, when I first told him who I was, and I was looking for my birth brother, and he said, "No, well, I'm your cousin," but he says, "We know all about you," and I was like, "What?" So, but it was interesting, and my uncle has since passed, but you know he's a very nice guy. He sent me pictures of himself, of the kids. And so eventually I got a message from someone who said, well, or a post from someone who said, for $40, I can, if you give me a name and a birth date, I can I can give you their address and their phone number. So I contacted him. Once I got $40 that we could spend. I went ahead and called him, sent the money. Now he said he wasn't making money; it was to pay for his data sources. And so I got the phone number, and I decided to call my birth brother, Robert. I called up there, talked to his wife, and she said, "Well, I really doubt it." I told her who I was and that I thought he might be my brother, and she says, "Well, I don't think so because he doesn't have any relatives." And but she said, "I'll let you talk to him anyway." But up until I got the information, when I finally had it, it was like, do I really call him? Do I write to him? Or because I'm calling a stranger, I'm writing to a stranger. I don't know how he's going to feel. I don't know if he's a criminal or a good guy. Turned out he's a good guy, a very nice, wonderful person. But I thought of all those things, but I did call him. When I talked to him, I asked him who his birth mother was, and he said, "Who do you think she was?" Because he was very suspicious. And when I told him, he said, "Yeah, I'm your brother." And so we talked. Uh, we made arrangements for me to eventually go visit him. He and his wife, Edwina, went ahead and bought tickets for me because we did at work. I worked for USARL, United States Army Aircraft Research Laboratory. And so, anyway, we were going to San Diego. And so they bought the tickets. Well, they canceled the trip, but they were going to reschedule it. So I had to call them up and tell them. And I said, but because they had already bought the tickets. And I said, but if, you know, get a refund on the tickets. And when I know exactly when we're going, I will call you and let you know. And we drove to California from Ozark, Alabama. And there were four of us, two trucks. And everyone except for the chief warrant officer, the other two enlisted were underneath me. They knew my story. And the Chief Warrant Officer 1, didn't know the story. And so we were laying over in a hotel to get some rest before the next day when we'd start driving again, and asked me how I felt about, was it if I was excited about meeting my brother. And the officer looked at me and was like, huh? And so I had to explain to him. He said, ah. But anyway, so we got there, and this was in November, so I got to meet my birth brother for on Veterans Day. And so he'd already sent me a picture of what he looked like. Of course, it was when he was much younger. So when I finally did see him, I almost didn't recognize him because he really didn't look like, you know. But when we met, it was great. And I met his family. Uh, they took us around. We went to different places, and I enjoyed my time. And what was neat was my bosses, the civilian bosses, drove me to the airport. I flew on the plane, and then when I came back, I told them when I was coming back, they came and picked me up. Then we went to our new assignment in California. And so eventually, my brother and I kept in touch, and I knew all their problems and stuff and happy things and everything. And after his wife died, you know, I'm now retired. This is back basically in the 2000s. Uh, my brother called us. His wife had died, and he called me one day and said that we were living in Prattville now, and I was working. And he called me one day and said that he was in his truck and is heading to New Orleans to be either a ghost hunter or a psychic. And so Ed and I talked, and we invited him to come live with us because we were afraid that he would end up on the street somewhere because he had no gainful employment and he was just, you know, traveling through. And he might find something there, but there was no guarantee. But my brother came to live with us, and I got to know him. And the things he told me were absolutely horrific. He was never adopted. He was put with a family. He said the last name was Stewart. And he said they were an older couple. He was there from the time he was born to when he was 9 or 10 years old. People came and asked him if he wanted to go to a new school. And he said, yeah. And so they took him with the clothes on his back, dropped him off at the orphanage, and left him there. And they were run by nuns. And the nun called his name, and he didn't recognize it. He thought his name was Robert Stewart. And she told him, no, you're Robert Pierce. Up until then, he thought that was his family. He did not know they were a foster family. He remembered being visited by a lady on several occasions, and he said she was a nice lady, but he didn't know. He assumes now that she was his birth mother. But at the time, he didn't know that she was just a strange lady that came. And so he went back and forth between foster homes and the orphanage off and on until he aged out of the system. He also talked about that some of the homes that he went to, foster homes, that he was abused. Either he didn't go to school or he did go to school. It was hit or miss. Someone wouldn't allow him to go to church because he was Catholic uh, at that time. They wouldn't allow him to read the Bible. Some wouldn't let him read at all. Some wouldn't let him go to school. So, you know, and he aged out of the system at 18 and just left. And I talk about that. And when you're searching, you never know what you're going to find. You don't know if you're going to be accepted or rejected, or if it's going to be somewhere in between. I've seen some people say that they contacted a birth mother or birth father, and at first it was fine, and then birth mother really got too familiar with them too fast and always wanted to be with them constantly, and it was just too much for them. Others say that when they got their found their birth mother, at first she was fine, then she said, go away. I can't do this anymore. Some rejected them and said they just couldn't tell their family. They were too ashamed, uh, whatever. Others would talk to them and said, well, give me time to tell my family. Only they never did, and they didn't want them contacting the family, their brothers, or anything. And so it's very difficult. The search is long and tedious. Even more so now because back when I first started, a lot of the databases were free. Now they aren't. Everything is basically you have to pay if you want to find out any information. But I just wanted to let you know that this is in the book. And if you'll please buy my book, it's at Amazon.com. I also have my own author's page on Amazon. It's AnnVBrady.com. And if you look me up on the on Amazon for either my homepage, my author's page, or just for the books, if you search for Ann V. Brady, you'll find all three of my books: A New Beginning, The Story of My Adoption, Life, and Service; my poetry book, Reminiscences and Beliefs; and my latest book, which is a children's book, which is called Breck. It's about our new dog and how we adopted him. And it's from his point of view. I used photographs that I took of him in the book. And y'all have a nice day. Have a happy weekend. And peace out.